Gourmet dried tomatoes have been on the market at a high price for the last few years. And tomatoes are okay to dry, but there are some things you need to know about them. First of all, you need to have the right type of tomato. And what we're growing here in the garden are plum tomatoes. This type of tomato is much meatier, and so you don't lose as much. This nice slicing tomato, while a great tomato for making a sandwich or for just a tomato salad, has such a high water content that you lose so much during the drying process that you don't really have much left. The plum tomato or the sauce tomato works very, very well for this. But unfortunately, one of the things you often find, we've had a lot of rain in the garden this year, and so what we often see at this time of year is that you get splits. And these can be used for drying as long as you get rid of all of the parts that are cut open. So it's a little bit more detailed. It's going to be a little bit more work intensive to enable you to get it to the drying stage, but you can still use them. Now, one of the things that I don't recommend that you do with tomatoes is go ahead and dry them and then cover them in oil for storage, because the tomato is right on the border of being an acid food, and it's between the acid fruits and the low acid vegetables. And the risk for having botulism develop in a tomato, a dried tomato that's stored covered in oil, room temperature, is relatively high. So if you want to do that, you can take a dried tomato that you've dried completely, put a little bit of oil over it, and put it in the refrigerator for a short period of time, but it's not a long-term room temperature approach. Now, it's very easy to do this. It really, because it's between a fruit and a vegetable, it moves fairly quickly. What I'm going to do is I steamed these a little bit, or boiled them just about, actually I put them in boiling water for about 30 seconds just to loosen the skin so that I'd be able to get to them. And then with this kind of tomato, we're simply going to cut the top off, and that skin's going to peel away. It just take a few minutes to do several tomatoes once you've taken that step and moved through that process. Then I have some that I've already taken care of, and simply cut them in half. That's all you have to do to these. Some people will recommend seeding them. Again, that's an extra step you can take if you don't like the seeds in the end. But this type of tomato works really, really well for anywhere you'd use a stewed tomato. It rehydrates well for that purpose, so the seeds would be expected in those functions. These tomatoes, dried tomatoes, do not rehydrate as you would use them in a salad, but they can be used in chips and flakes and added to salads or sauces or stews. So there's a lot of uses for them. The best method for drying them is going to be a dehydrator. Sun-dried tomatoes are all the rage. However, they do not work well in Oklahoma because our humidity is simply too high for the tomato to get enough water evaporated fast enough to keep the bacterial growth down, as well as mold growth. Very often sun-dried tomatoes will mold because they have been not dried far enough. Also, sun-dried tomatoes, you have more of a problem with insect infestation, so you'll have people who dried them completely and then stored them in little plastic bags, and when it's time to use them, they find that they have moths or insect larvae crawling around in them because they didn't pasteurize them. These are going to go in at 140 degrees. You could do this in your oven, but it's going to take you at least twice as long to do it in an oven. Most ovens don't go down low enough. The reason it takes longer is because it's so much more difficult for the moisture to evaporate from an oven, because the oven door, even if it's ajar, doesn't let the dry air come in and the moist air go out nearly as quickly. If you've dried them outside, if you've either solar dried them or sun dried them, anywhere that you might have a problem with insect infestation, then you need to pasteurize, and that simply means putting them in a freezer bag, sealing them down, putting them in the freezer for 48 hours, or you could put them in your regular oven at 160 degrees for a short period of time, for about 30 minutes, and that will take care of any larvae, that kind of thing that may have been there. As you can see, I've done two different kinds of tomatoes here. These are actually the tomatoes that came from the garden. And they dry from masses of tomatoes this size down to very small amounts. The tray that you just saw was completely filled, and this is all that I ended up with. So you have much smaller storage. You have all the fiber, most of the nutrients, although the vitamin C and some of the B vitamins are going to be lost by the heat. This other batch of tomatoes is supermarket tomato. The problem with using a supermarket tomato is that they may have been refrigerated, which causes them to start to get mushy. So you have much more control over these. If you're using your own and you're not ready to do a whole batch, don't put them in the refrigerator. It's best to start drying as soon as possible, but don't put them in the refrigerator or they will lose quality real fast. For this type of thing, I do recommend that you peel them. Both of these have been peeled. And it's simply because the kinds of uses that are most appropriate for this type of dried tomato involve cooking, and that peel is going to come off later and cause you problems, so it's better to get rid of it early on. If you'd like more information on how to dry tomatoes, how to store them for the long term, which I recommend putting them at least in the refrigerator, preferably in the freezer, go to the website, and we've got a little section there on how to dry them, how to store them, how to pasteurize them if you need to do that. I hope this is something you'll try. It's a good alternative for the traditional method of preserving tomatoes, and it's kind of fun to do.